Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Yajavanu Sute Devi Pranamami Priti. Shri Guru Vaishnava Guru Parampara ki Jai, Raji Gopal ki Jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai, Gaud Premanande. Good evening. Welcome. Susan? Yes. And? Carolyn. Very nice to meet you. So we gathered again to continue our discussion from Caitanya-caritāmṛta. Caitanya-caritāmṛta is a book composed by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, and he was, as he's related in the book, kind of the second generation from the founding acharyas or teachers of the whole lineage coming from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he very faithfully took the message, the insights, the theology and philosophy put forward in the Sanskrit language by the founding acharyas or teachers, and very faithful to that, he took that message and rendered it into Bengali, which was a speaking vernacular, and this way he was very much instrumental in taking the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as they were formalized by the six Goswamis, again the founding acharyas, and instrumental in kind of circulating widely those insights, because Sanskrit was the language for the highly educated sadhus, saints and so forth, rather than for the common people. His book is quite a interpretation of those texts in his own work. So it's a very important work, and it's a work that has been referred to by persons in the academic community who have studied the Gaudiya tradition as the final word. Final word, what they mean by that is that in the forming of the lineage and the literature that was the basis of that lineage, this was kind of the final word that brought together many different notions about Chaitanya and who he was, what it was that his contribution was, and so on and so forth. So it formed the orthodoxy of the tradition. And so a very important text, and it's a philosophical and theological book that is deeply insightful, but easy to read in the sense that it is that philosophy and theology is couched in the narrative of the life of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it's Puranic in that sense, if you will, referring to the general public is interested in. Mostly the general public is interested in the outer world, if you will, the objective world, and identifying with it through the medium of the mind and senses, through thoughts and things. We get wrapped up and almost to the point often of thinking ourselves to be a thing. And of course we're not, the best things in life are not things, so that's good for us, but that is not the way the common people, the general public, thinks about it often, unfortunately. So sit close was the idea. And now that body of text, the Upanishads, which are thought to be sounds that are without authorship, there might be likened to the idea in math. In mathematics, there are competing ideas as to whether math is something that is created by humans to describe the world, or whether math mathematical formulas are discovered by human society, and they magically, they're telling something about the natural world. Two schools of thought there. So the Vedic sounds of the Upanishads are something like mantras, or something like sound formulas, like mathematical sound formulas. And as we know, of course, physically speaking, everything has a sound, even inside the atom, the orbit of the electrons or whatnot, they all have a sound attached to them. And there are scientific theories today in the modern world about this, at the bottom level, if you will, as low as, or as deep as you can go into the subatomic world, there are sounds, harmonics. The harmonics, there are, to carry this a little further, there are, of course, mathematical formulas that correspond with harmonics. So, see what I'm saying? With regard to the sounds of the Vedas, it's thought that the world comes out of sound, and there are certain sounds by which one can transcend the world. Those are the ones we're most interested in, because by transcending the world, the thought is you've understood it in essence, for what it is. You see it from a different vantage point. And so, following these sounds, of course, the sounds of the Upanishads are written down at a certain point, but they're thought to have been discovered, if you will, and then recorded. And then you have a body of text among the sacred texts of the Hindus that reflects on the sounds and speaks about them and their implications through narratives. So they're a little easier to follow, and they have human authorship. So when you tell a story, the Puranas are thought to be, the Upanishads are thought to be kind of the language of a king who just says, do this. It should be done like that. There's no necessarily explanation. It sounds a little bit draconian perhaps, but there's affection behind it. So like a mother might say, don't do that. And, she loves you, so you don't do it. But while the Vedas speak like a king, if you will, and as I'm explaining, so let's take a walk. So as the Puranas give the teaching in the context of a narrative, so Caitanya-caritāmṛta is a narrative. Academically, it's called hagiography, or a narrative of a religious, spiritual saint. And the idea of the author is to shed light on the person of Sri Caitanya as he was experienced by the founding teachers of our lineage, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Jiva Goswami. I'm not sure how familiar the two of you are with some of these names and language and so on, so forgive me if I speak in ways that's too high for some, it'll be too low for others, so a little patience. Not everybody's part is required, and that's a virtue, of course. So, a little introduction to what it is that we're reading from. Literally, the Caitanya-caritāmṛta means, Chaitanya means consciousness. Okay? By consciousness here, we don't mean to be aware of something, like I'm conscious of it. That is a function of consciousness. What we mean by consciousness is the sense of I. I am. This sense. We may ask a person, what are you? Who are you, let's say? We sometimes want to know, who am I? So you might say, I'm John. And then you say, of course, well, John, your name could be changed to Michael. So obviously you're not John or Michael, either of these sounds. Yeah, of course, it's a referent. John is a referent, but I'm not that, right? So what are you, whoever you are? And then, you might say, well, this is what I am. I'm this biological and psychological organism and psychological arrangement, psyche. And why am I this body? Because if you're in your car, you don't think you're the car. Why don't you think you're the car when you're in it? Because you can get out, and you can see that you're separate from it. But I'm not separate from my body. But then if we were to separate parts of your body, like take away your arm, would you still be you? You would be, if we took away the leg. And of course, there are people that have lost arms and legs and kidneys and so forth, and lungs and so on. And so it would appear that you're not the body by that simple logic. And then there's, mind. So I am my mind, I am my thoughts, and so forth. Of course, we can separate thoughts from ourselves as well. We're doing thinking. Thoughts change all the time. I think in one way, later I think in another way. So those thoughts that were me later are somebody else's thoughts. They're not mine. I don't agree with them anymore. And so because they change, they're not me. And this, what we're talking about, what are you all the time? And so in this way, we gradually come to the idea that what we are is this sense of I. I is the smallest word in the English language, probably in any language. It's the most used word and the most misunderstood one. No one says, in English at least, I, probably in any other language, any word more than I. And again, it's a small one, but what is it? What is the I? And so what we come to is that the I is that which is the basis of all experience. And everything else we've talked about, cars, bodies, body parts, thoughts, and so forth, are all experienced. And this is the definition of Jiva Swami. I is the consciousness is that which we refer to when we say I, which is not reducible. We've reduced everything else here, but the I is at the bottom. There's a Vedantic idea, and it's a well thought out one that of course consciousness is irreducible. It cannot be dismissed. A very active dismissal requires consciousness to do the dismissing. So it's at the bottom of everything. It's what we are. This is the spiritual, yogic and Vedanta perspective. Modern world and scientific community, they're trying to avoid this at all costs, because it has certain implications to it, and it appears on the surface to go against what seems to be a building body of evidence that there's nothing outside of the physical laws. But as they build the evidence to that, the question of what is physical, what is matter, keeps rising up and changing, and so forth. So there is an attempt philosophically and scientifically, or through philosophy, to interpret scientific data, to say, to posit, to believe that consciousness can be reduced to matter, but it's a belief, number one, and number two, the fact is that in science we don't even know what matter is to reduce consciousness to it. Problem. And we think, of course, the problem is because consciousness is not matter, and there are physical world is not necessarily closed, and there is a possibility of an influence outside of the natural world to influence the natural world. That's what consciousness does by will and so forth. And that's something that you can experience through spiritual practice and meditation and so on. So the word Chaitanya means consciousness in this sense. But it says something, I've talked a little bit about consciousness, and really all I've said about it is it's not the body, it's not the mind, it's not different from the natural world, it's not this and it's not that, it's not this and it's not that. It is, but what is it? So we've kind of defined it, in a sense, in a negative way. Neti, neti, not this, not that. As the Upanishads say. But what Caitanya-caritāmṛta seeks to do, which is very interesting and peculiar in a sense, even within the context of the sacred texts of the Hindus, is to pick up where that leaves off. So what it is not is one thing. So Caitanya-caritāmṛta, Chaitanya means consciousness, charit means character, and amrit means deathless or immortal. It also means nectar, because it's like the fountain of youth, to use a European term, or this is the Hindu term, the soma, rasa, the nectar of immortality, the drink of the gods, as it's thought. So amrit means no death or immortal, and it also means nectar, like some kind of, you could drink it and become immortal idea, which is what they were looking for when they came here, I think, the Spaniards, the fountain of youth. They got old doing it. And so, of course, the idea is it's not out there, it's inside. So, as we say sometimes, go within or go without. So Caitanya-caritāmṛta. So Chaitanya is consciousness, but this book is about the immortal character of consciousness, or the character of consciousness in immortality. In other words, we know that consciousness, if we know or conclude that consciousness is not physical or psychic, then it means it lies beyond the time and space. It transcends the natural world. It's supernatural. Sometimes people say, I don't believe in the soul, but no one could say, I don't believe in consciousness. Now, people define consciousness in different ways, and I'm defining it in a particular way, and there's a materialistic attempt to define it as something that goes on in the brain that we haven't figured out what it is yet. So we're not bothering with that. They haven't figured it out yet, and we don't think it is part of the brain. And we have a line, a lineage, and other lineages as well of Vedanta besides our own that's full of experiencers that speak about the unmitigated experience, direct experience of consciousness through inward pursuit and in a systematic way. Not just I imagine I went inside and God spoke to me, but through a systematic way of withdrawing the senses from sense objects, which is sitting. There's a saying, I think by a Buddhist author, don't just do something, sit there, which is quite the opposite of what we used to hear as kids, you know. So and it takes a lot to just sit there. It's easy to be busy and not answer the questions that kids ask. Daddy, why am I? Don't ask that. Ha ha, they laugh at it, you know. I asked that when I was a kid too. There are no answers to that. Get busy. So we are busy, unfortunately, and busy not answering the deeper questions of life by methods that are thought to answer them, as described in the sacred text, that involve going within, going about it in a different way. And there's many lineages of deeply experienced persons in this regard that say very similar, if not the same things about consciousness. So we call this intersubjectivity. So you get some objectivity about the subjective experiences when this person has it, this person has it, this person has it, and they're all using the same methodology or similar methodology. So there are different types of yoga and nuanced types of spiritual approaches, but on the bottom line, they're all seeking to experience the nature of consciousness. And then relative to the approach, the experience may have nuanced differences, but there are common ground there. The experience that I'm eternal. Mm-hmm. That I'm constituted of a kind of knowing that makes all other knowing unknowing, not worth knowing. This kind of knowledge and a kind of ananda, bliss, a joy that exceeds anything that could be construed as joy through a thing or a thought, let's say. It has no joy, obviously, unto itself. Anyway, so the self is a unit of joy, of sat, of chit, of ananda. That's the basic idea. But here, this book is talking about, okay, let's go on from there. What is within eternality, what is the character of consciousness? What are the possibilities of consciousness? That's where we go from this kind of negative description, which I mean in a positive way. It's not this, it's not that, to its prospect. And here, of course, the idea is prospect is personified in the person of Sri Caitanya, who is the spiritual, religious figure in human history that is reported by numerous learned people. I mean, he has 6, 7, 8 different biographies about him from persons either who were in his presence or just half a generation or generation afterwards. And they spoke about him as the very embodiment of ananda, of spiritual ecstasy. The descriptions are extraordinary as to the kind of transformations, physical transformations, that occurred as a result of that inner ecstasy. And there's no, this is not judgmental, I mean, it's just a fact. Religious figure in human history that, excuse me, more embodies, excuse me, spiritual ecstasy than what we witnessed in him. And this means to tap into the ananda aspect of the self. And so the founding teachers of the lineage, they took the scriptural map, if you will, of all the sacred texts, and they saw in his person certain measure of ecstasy and ananda, and then they located him on the map, and they identified him in this way as Krishna in pursuit of Radha's experience of him from her perspective, whatever that is. The ecstasy of Radha, which he feels in relation to Krishna. And so they saw him as a combined descent of Radha and Krishna. Krishna pursuing the experience of Radha's love for him. The idea is something like this, that Krishna is ecstasy personified, and he notices that the Radha, his counter whole, has experience of something in himself that he doesn't experience. Just like your partner can experience something about you that, you don't have to tell you about it. You're actually like this, And so and that is driving her like mad in ecstasy. And he is really the kind of connoisseur of love and ecstasy. And so he sees that the measure of her experience exceeds his own. So it's kind of an existential crisis for Krishna. I thought I was the king of ecstasy, and everybody sees me as such. But the fact is, if I were to be candid with you, he says, Radha's ecstasy seems to exceed mine. So how do I figure this out? Of course, he's an intelligent person. He realized, oh, it's something in me. I am the center. It's something in me that makes her the way that she is. But it's something in me that can only be experienced from her vantage point, from the vantage point of bhakti. She is called Bhakti Devi, the queen of bhakti. So in every bhakta, in every devotee, there's a little bit of Radha, if you will. A little bit of ecstasy of Radha. Yeah. This is the idea. So seeing that he wants to experience himself with ideas from the vantage point of the devotee of himself. Very peculiar idea. And so the Godhead descends as a devotee of himself, and naturally, in the pursuit of that experience, teaches devotion by his own example. An example speaks louder than precept. So it's a powerful narrative speaking of the life of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Many deep, as we're speaking a little bit, philosophical, theological points are raised, and how to live the life of a devotee and rise to that experience oneself. That's what the book is about. So, in this, and it means to rise as a unit of consciousness into a transcendental rapport or relationship with the God, with Krishna, that we call rasa. Rasa is really the eternal, about the eternal, immortal character, the character of consciousness in immortality. The character where there's characteristics in consciousness, rather as opposed to consciousness being indeterminate. A determinate expression of consciousness, where there are qualities in consciousness. Consciousness takes a shape. Love has a form that expresses itself. So there's consciousness in an indeterminate state, so to speak, and then there's determinate consciousness, where you can actually talk about it. Because the indeterminate consciousness, you can say it's not this, it's not that. It's not like anything in this world. We can't compare it to anything. How can we define it? But when we're speaking about consciousness in a determinate condition, we're talking about consciousness with qualities and movement, character. That's interesting, because Brahman, as I often say, is everywhere. The underlying consciousness, the ground of being, is everywhere, and therefore it can't move because it's already everywhere. So where could it go? If you're everywhere, there's nowhere to go. But we find that Krishna is moving. We call that Leela. That's very peculiar. So that which is everywhere is now moving. How can that be? The force is bhakti. The force that drives the Leela. What makes Krishna dance? It's Radha. Her love. So the devotee brings, in a sense, a determinate character to consciousness. It becomes determined. It takes a shape in love of God. Leela is movement that's unlike the movement of this world, which we call karma. Obligatory movement. You've sown and now you reaped. You've taken and now you owe. Leela is not a movement that you have to do, or that you move, or movement out of a sense of being empty, and that I'll become more by acquiring. It's rather a movement out of fullness, a celebratory movement. I'm so full, I should celebrate. Invite friends over, tell them, let's have a party, something like that. So this is the idea of Leela. So we want to enter the party. Not just leave the world and be peaceful. We want peace and love, both. So that's what this book is about. And we are just at the final section now of chapter 13, which has been a long build-up to the beginning of the narrative itself. And in this chapter we have a synopsis of the first part of the narrative, the Adi Leela. There's the Adi Leela. Adi means beginning, Madhya Leela means the middle, and Anta Leela means the end. So the Leela of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the narrative of his life, is divided into 3 sections. We heard that earlier in this chapter. The middle section is the most important because the way is shown there for us. There's other ways in which to emphasize that the beginning Leela is more important. There's other ways in which to emphasize that the end Leela is more important. But Kaviraj, the author, has chosen to emphasize the middle Leela as the way. We're now towards the end of a brief synopsis of the beginning Leela. And the next chapter will begin the actual narrative of the beginning Leela. So in this synopsis of the beginning part of the Leela, we've heard now that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has appeared. He'll tell it again in more detail as he goes through the actual narrative, but in brief he said what? The origin, the cause, that which is behind the appearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he began with the esoteric reason that I just touched on. Krishna wanted to experience Radha's love for him, so otherworldly. For that reason he appeared. He said he appeared, but before he appeared, his Guru Varga appeared, means the elders in his life, his Guru, his Grand Guru, his father, his mother, his uncle, all the seniors in his life. Amongst them, Advaita and Haridas were mentioned, prominent figures in the Leela. And having mentioned a few names, then he began to speak about Advaita and the significance of Advaita, who called Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to appear through his like morning worship. He worshipped the Shalagram representing Vishnu with well, it represents Krishna also, but as you like, but with Tulsi and water from the Ganges and this, and we heard he called Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this is a reference to the external reason for his appearance. There's an internal reason and an external reason. External reason to give compassion to the world and so on. And so we talked a little bit about that, how the world arises out of compassion, why there is a world that we experience, and how Advaita or Mahavishnu that he represents is the embodiment of such compassion. For the Godhead to experience compassion and bestow mukti, liberation, there has to be somebody to bestow it upon. So, living in the Paravyom, in the spiritual dimension, everybody's already liberated. So, this is not something that happens in time, but the idea is the Godhead is full of love, so the compassionate love is also part of the Godhead's experience. So there needs to be a world where that can be expressed. That's what this world is. It's an opportunity for the Godhead to bestow compassion. And so the Mahavishnu expands from Narayan and the world. The one Mahavishnu becomes many. Ikshiter now Shabda. Yeah. Eko Bahusham. One becomes many. Out of joy. But the many are small. And the material nature is big that the one presides over, so there's problems. And so he avatars in different forms to sense try to resolve the problem, give the teaching, give the Vedas, set example, and so this is all called the Srishti Leela, the Leela of creation. It has no beginning; it goes in cycles, and it's the arena, the realm in which the Godhead experiences compassion. So Advaita is is a personification in this world of the Mahavishnu, and so he was mentioned, and some things were said about him calling Mahaprabhu and so on, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and so on and so forth. We've gone through that, and then the time, the quality of the time that Chaitanya appeared was described in his birth chart, astrological chart. Was given, because it was customary in those times that when a child was born, there would be a jyotish or an astrologer who would do the chart, and then it would tell something about the child's characteristics, future, so on and so forth. So the story here was, as it was described, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in the womb for 13 months. It's a long time, instead of 9 or 9.5, or he was stretching it. So there was some concern, and his maternal grandfather, Nilambar Chakravarti, was an astrologer. He was called to the scene, and he did the chart, looking at his daughter, and said that he will appear at this time, and was just shortly thereafter in the 13th month. So the chart was given. That we talked a little bit about astrology, and it was a brief discussion. But the idea, of course, is that the stars, the planets, they influence us. I mean, they do physically, obviously. The moon influences the tides. The sun influences us because by the sun's influence we have vegetation, and we have rain, and we have food. So we're influenced by the sun physically, and we're influenced psychically also by the sun. The mind is enlivened when the sun comes up, and the mind goes a certain way when the moon comes out to the full moon. So these are examples of how in the heavens, if you will, the spheres, the planets, influence us physically and psychically. Astrology, in a sense, just takes it a little further and says that there are more subtle influences on the psyche as well. And as much as the psyche is influenced, the physical body will be influenced by the stars, and not just the sun, and not just the moon, and so on and so forth. And this is thought to be very superstitious amongst the rationalists today. But I didn't mention this, but after we discussed this briefly the last time, when I was walking back to my tree that I stay under every night, out there in the forest somewhere. I just come in at night. But I remembered that I had seen a brief video of a godbrother of mine who was an astrologer, and he was invited onto a television show by a famous skeptic named Michael Shermer. He's famous in the skeptic world, and he's famous for challenging ideas that are spiritual, ideas that are things that are said to contradict nature and the parapsychological realm, and so on and so forth. So he obviously would place astrology in the realm of superstition, misattributed cause and effect. That is called a superstition. So on the show, I'll just mention it to you, on the show, the astrologer, who is actually a devotee of Krishna, he was given the task of doing the chart of 6 or 8 people. But what Shermer had done is on 2 of the people, he changed the charts. So when the astrologer read the chart for one lady, it was actually another lady's chart, and vice versa. So he went through the first, 6 people, and he was giving their chart, and they were going, yeah, that sounds like me. But, these things can be kind of vague sometimes, and you can go, yeah, I think that's me. I want to be like that, or something like that. So the suspicion of the skeptic was that, this is pretty broad. Some of the things were fairly specific. But anyway, when we get to the 2, then, we'll show the facts. So when he read the one of the lady's charts, she said, no, that's not me. No, nothing like that. No, boo, you lost. So the audience is thinking, see, it didn't work. Works sometimes for some gullible people, but this lady's got her head together, And so, and then the last one, no, that's not me either. No. But then he had to reveal Shermer, and he was very unnerved to have to do it, that he had changed the 2 charts. And so then he read each of their actual charts, and they said, yeah, that's me. So it was very... I wrote to the guy when I saw it, and he said, yeah, Shermer was really, really pissed off that night. Yeah. So, a little evidence anyway. So for the power of astrology, I mentioned the book Psyche and the Cosmos that I had read, which was very powerful and compelling and very rational approach to which used astrology to saying that the universe has intelligence, that there's a supernatural, there's a cause, there's a purpose to life, there's meaning. We're units of meaning and value. We're units of consciousness and so forth. So, at any rate, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's chart was given. Now, one of my godbrothers is an astrologer. We've asked him to give us a good reading of it, so we're waiting for that to come in of all the details. Of course, we know it's live, but to see how it corresponds with the different movements, the placing of the stars, the heavens in his birth chart at the time of his birth. So, we're waiting for that to come in. Of course, this is very peculiar, and he said it in his email to us that I have to do the astrological chart of God. That's pretty peculiar. Another devotee, Bhaktisundar Govinda Maharaj, who was the spiritual successor of Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj when he passed away, was also a Jyotish, or an astrologer. And he used to say, the only thing wrong with astrology, he said, is that the most important planet is not in the in part of the reading, and that's Goloka, Krishna's planet. So what he meant to say is that there are other factors that for the spiritual person, perhaps there's a way I think that you could read them astrologically, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the person. It is said by Narottam Thakur, Goloker Premodhan Harinam Sankirtan, the love, the wealth of prem, that is prem, is pure love in Goloka, the abode of Krishna, has been exported here through the vehicle of the chanting of Krishna's name that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was the personification of. That was the method to his madness, to his ecstasy. So he's brought Goloka into our charts, if you will. So the ordinary Jyotish won't be able to read that, but a good one will see there's an extraordinary influence in your life here that can take you beyond all the planetary and karmic influences. So, then tonight we hear Nadya Ujjagiri Puna Chandra Gaur Hari Kripakori Hoila Udai Papatama Huilanash Chijakater Ulas Jagabori Horidwani Hai. Beautiful Bengali poetry. Here he starts in a different meter to conclude this chapter with a number of beautiful verses that are really worth reciting just in the original Bengali. He mentions Nadya Ujjagiri. Ujjagiri is a way of speaking about sunrise. Ujjagiri, in fact, the first point on the mountain where the sun touches or shows. This is Ujjagiri, so it's a way of speaking about sunrise. Nadya Ujjagiri Punachandra Gaurahari. He says that Gaurhari, who is compared to the full moon, Purnachandra, because we heard when he was born, there was a lunar eclipse. And the lunar eclipse is personified in the Vedic astrology as the planet Rahu. It's a node, right? It's personified as Rahu, and it's thought to be a malefic influence. And so the malefic influence of Rahu covered the full moon because the full moon had spots, because the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was compared to the full moon without any spots, just pure. And also the implication is that his appearance and his method, again, that he taught to his madness, to his ecstasy, the chanting of Krishna Nam, which everybody was doing at that time because you got the malefic influence of the eclipse was such that they went in the Ganges and they bathed and they would all chant Krishna, Govinda, and so forth. So his appearance was heralded by the chanting of the names, and Rahu arranged this. The poetic thought is, and the implication philosophically is, that his appearance and the method, his chanting, is such that it can turn negatives into positives. Love has the power to turn faults into ornaments. All contradictions will be resolved in love, and the world is a knot of contradictions. I've said it before, the moral life is the attempt to be perfectly virtuous which is absolutely impossible. Because you step down here, it comes up there. You step down there, it comes up here. You agree with this politician 99%, but he voted wrong on the gun laws or something, whatever it is. They don't like that part of him, whatever it is. So there's a lesson in that. I've given the example. I found a spider in a fly's web. I went to free the spider, but there was the fly. I found a fly in a spider. I went to free the fly, but then the spider came walking, and I thought, I'm taking his dinner. What? There's no. That's the world. So the point is, moral life is how to behave, how to act. But there's no way in which we can act in this world to be perfectly virtuous. You have to eat to live. If you don't eat this, well, you're going to eat that. So we can go down the scale and say, well, we go down on the chain of life, and it'd be vegetarians, because it's different to pick an apple than it is to slaughter an animal. Obviously, there's less pain involved, but still, you still have to breathe, and you're going to kill microbes by that. So there's no way to be perfectly virtuous, so to speak. So the idea is that the moral life is a shadow of absolute goodness. And there's a Platonic and more realm of absolute good, absolute beauty. And the self, the Atma, the unit of consciousness, is a unit of that. A unit of that. Has the capacity to live in that soil. That's where it belongs. And so there's, beyond the moral life, or the religious life, in the Hindu circles it would be called the karma marg, the path of karma, and dharma, righteousness, is the spiritual life. So there's religious life, and then there's spiritual life, from our perspective. I think it's true in every religious tradition, because you have this religious life, and then there's the mystics in all the traditions. The Sufi, the Rumis, the Jesuses, the Buddhas, and so forth. And then you got the religious versions of all this stuff that fight with one another over everything, and so on. My uniform is better than your uniform, and whatnot. I use this word for you. This one's right and that one's wrong. Instead of, they're both different expressions of the same thing. So we have to go to the heart of the religious traditions. There we find the spiritual. There we find the mystical. There we find the real hope, because look at modern science, which is another way of knowing, right? We say religion is a way of knowing. Modern science was born as a Christian. Newton, Copernicus, all these people, they were all Christians. They thought modern science would validate the existence of the God. Of course, as modern science grew up, it became agnostic. Now, it's an atheist. But if it is to prevail, has to become a mystic. That's full circle. Then it'll live into old age, become a mystic, because in mysticism, we find something more than in religion, and what lacks in religion, and what becomes really a misunderstanding of the heart of the tradition, which is mystical and otherworldly, if you will, or a real answer of how to live in the world is found there. The breakdown of that, religion is just thought to be some superstition and a bunch of laws that don't pertain anymore, and so on and so forth. So mysticism, this is where we want to go. Again, we're back to experiencing the I and its prospects and so on and so forth. So we got there from astrology. I guess we were saying that the world has purpose, meaning, overarching meaning, and so forth. And and what Udagiri, the sunrise. So here described here is that he appeared. Right, we're saying that he Purnachandra, Gaurhari made a name for Chaitanya. He was like the full moon, and the Rahu got the other moon out of the way so that he could be, his birth could be heralded, and was heralded by the chanting, and the chanting has the power to turn faults into ornaments. This is the power of love. Love has the power to resolve the moral problems. That's why Schopenhauer thought, and he was influenced by Buddhism and Hinduism, a German philosopher, that compassion was the basis of morality. So if you love your neighbor like yourself, well, and how to behave with other people is figured out. And in order to love your neighbor like yourself, you have to see yourself and your neighbor to be more than whatever we appear to be on the surface. Otherwise, you can't love them like yourself, because your material bodily self and mental self is different. So there has to be something we have in common, and it's more than our humanity. It's that we are I. We are units of consciousness. We are part of the ground of being, so to speak. So this requires moving away from taking and exploitation, and that's part, obviously, of loving. Not taking is part of loving. So even renunciation is a step away from taking, and in a sense, it's a step towards loving on a deeper level. Even psychologically, we learn in relationships, you want to let the person be who they are instead of be what I need you to be, for me only. So there has to be some stepping back, so to speak, to look at them objectively. Then you have a better capacity to love them, to give to them, instead of they being objects from which you're taking. That doesn't work very well. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his doctrine, his teaching, his example is very much a doctrine of loving, in a full sense of the term. And his appearance is heralded in the way it is here by the eclipse, and the implications of it is that he will give a teaching by which even malefic influences can be turned into positives. A teaching of love, that it has the capacity to turn faults into ornaments. Here is described as Gaurhari Purnachandra Udyagiri. Let me read the translation for us here, this verse. So thus, by his causeless mercy, the full moon, Gaurhari, rose in the district of Nadia. So he's born during the lunar eclipse, and then with the sunrise, it's his first day. I'll end with this. The sunrise that is mentioned here is a very, very beautiful thing in West Bengal, where he appeared. West Bengal is at the Bay of Bengal, so where the Ganges empties out into the ocean. So it's a long journey from the glacier, high in the Himalayas, all the way down to the ocean. It's a culmination for the river, the sacred river there, and it's the flatland, right? And if you stand in the morning and look out, you see just endless fields of green, of rice paddy, flat as far as you can see. It's all flat. And then the sun appears. The sun is, of course, very bright, and you can't look at it. It's powerful. It influences us. We're dependent upon it in so many ways, so it's kind of like a metaphor for God. Where would we be without the sun? There's a meditation, a Buddhist meditation, to think of where the sun is all day long. It's a way of fixing the mind and how it's influencing me, and so on. So, at any rate, and in the Vedas, in the sacred text of the Hindus, the sun is often metaphorically compared to God. like this, like we're dependent upon the sun. If it didn't rise, what would happen? And so on and so forth. So it's powerful, the point is, and it's bright, and you can't look at it. It's so entirely. But my point is, when the sun rises in West Bengal, it just pops up like a big, big rust-colored ball. And you can look at it. Not like you can't look at it at noon, but you can look at it, right? Because it's so much, I guess it's closer. I don't know that much about the science of it, but I guess it's closer. You can look at it. In fact, you can't stop looking at it. And it feels as if you could just run up and touch it. It feels like the sun has softened itself and come within your grasp, landed on earth to become one of us, something like that. So that which is a metaphor for God and some distance from us and can't even look at it has now come close and made himself accessible and soothing, and again, you can't stop looking at. I mean, it feels like you could just run and touch the sun. So this is the way. It has much to do with the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because he teaches about a concept of God that is sweet and charming, not somebody that has no face, sitting on a cloud, you can't see him, but that you can get close to, so close that just like Radha is close, like almost like romantically, or the intimacy of friendship. The baseline of love in the realm of Krishna is called Sakya, friendship. It's the baseline. From there it goes to Vatsalya, parental love, and romantic love. The baseline is Sakya. And it extends from the beginning, from the bottom, to the end. It touches the Madhurya, the romantic. It touches the Vatsalya. It touches the Dasya. So, and the rust color is the color of friendship. In the Indian aesthetics, every emotion has a color. So it's the color of friendship. So it's like the Vrindavan idea of Krishna, of love and intimacy that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to give, is very much like resembles this phenomenon of the sun appearing, landing on earth, if you will, for a few moments in West Bengal. Srimad Mahaprabhu ki jai. So that's it for tonight. We'll continue tomorrow with further discussion and conclude the chapter, hopefully. Any question? What is the time?
7:37.
Okay, we'll stop there. Srimad Mahaprabhu ki jai. Gaur Bhakta